fellow authors, fellow producers in the community.
So if I'm assigning points right now, AJ, Nikki, and Edwin all had copies of their book, but Jim Jam said that he was happy to be here first. So
we lost.
Naturally.
It's a little up in the air.
GG.
Well, that's just how I feel, so it's nothing really. But
guys, I'm going to start with a really basic question, but writing a book is a gargantuan task. For all of you, it's the first time that you've written a book of this length. It's a pretty humongous endeavor. It takes up a lot of your life.
Oh, you were in
Why
here.
Melee?
So,
Why is the thing that got you to do this thing that is so monumental?
Well, I think Melee is an extremely passionate community, and I consider myself a little obsessively passionate about the things I choose. So it came naturally as an artist, and with the opportunity I was afforded in my master's to only bring it out forth to the world by bringing Nikki on to bring it to SSBM. It just kind of happened. Passion to passion. Pew.
I guess for me, it would be just the sheer amount of information and cultural preservation that exists within Melee, and I wanted to put as much of it as I could in a book.
yeah, Melee's probably one of the few things that I am immersed in enough to write about, and just writing like a humor book is kind of the natural contribution to the culture that I would go for. So yeah, once I saw other books were coming out about Melee, it's like, oh, it's time to write a satirical version of those.
Yeah, you guys all said it's close to you. That's a big part of it, right? It's close. AJ said obsessive. Jim Jan said because, it's just what comes naturally. And I think that comes across really strongly in all your books, is that this is not just something that you are writing about from a sort of objective perspective. Actually, in AJ's book, they reference a term called the ACA-fan, of, a portmanteau of academic and fan, that sort of allows for a unique perspective of looking at something from this academic perspective, but also integrating your personal experience of fandom into studying it, writing about it, doing the satire of it in whatever way. How do you guys think that your intense fandom, because I think that applies to all of us, has influenced the way you guys wrote these books?
Definitely forced me to be meticulous, because I know how meticulous the community is and can be with standards that are kind of tacit and universalized but never often spoken about. So I felt the need to really fact check firstly.
I also think one of the things about being an ACA fan that we touch upon in the book is that when you're such a huge fan of something and you want to write about it from any perspective, not even just academic necessarily, is you can often become blind to the things about it that are worth criticizing. You think so much about all the positive memories that you've had with it, all the funny anecdotes, the hype moments, the wonderful things that you've witnessed, and the friendships that you've made as a part of it. But you, in your efforts to write about it, your judgment can often become clouded as to, dissecting the whole of it. And so I feel like that was something that at least AJ and I personally, as collaborators and co-authors, had to contend with when writing the book.
I think for me, it was the idea of understanding that there was a time in my life and a time in many people's lives where a video game meant a lot to them, and that they were willing to organize and go quite beyond the traditional expectations of preserving something regarding a video game that mattered a lot to them. And I wanted to make sure I would have something in the future that I could pass off to someone if they just wanted a quick recap of what Melee, tournament results and different narratives throughout Melee history, for whatever it is worth, without presenting that as the only thing.
Yeah, I like Melee in one way or another. I feel like I'm just thinking about it all the time. Whether I'm just reading Melee stuff on Twitter, or just playing Melee, or anytime, for decades now, I see my old high school buddies, we're gonna play Melee, that's just what's gonna happen. So one, you're just always thinking about it. So whether it be like a deep analysis or like a humorous take on it. Like those things are gonna kind of spring up naturally in your own brain. But also just like enjoying this thing, and like I want it to keep going. I want it like to get bigger. Like I want it to go on indefinitely. So the more cultural artifacts around it, that probably ensures it. So just contributing it like that.
Let's talk about that idea of cultural artifacts. This is something I think that's pretty important. Is that, I mean, you guys, two of your guys' books are available online. Jim Jam and Edwin, your books are available online. AJ and Nikki, your book is pretty much exclusively available in person, but you guys have also made physical copies of the book. You talked about artifacts, Jim Jam. What is the importance of having a physical artifact, a physical, piece of evidence for work in this community? How did you guys all make that decision that, oh yeah, having a physical book is really important, actually?
For me personally, my art practice does include a lot of printmaking and bookmaking, and I'm pretty in love with the concept of a codex book, that being that it goes in chronological order. And because the Melee community has such a strong relationship to hardware, it only felt natural to create my own hardware per se. Even though it's just a book, it's still technically hardware. It's a tool for knowledge. It serves a purpose, and so I thought I would emulate our love of objects through my love of objects. And one more thing would be that I like this idea of object-oriented ethnography, where people explain that objects have a social life and interact with us in our environments. And although we're surrounded by inanimate objects every day, I personally like to believe that a lot of them may have spirits, or that like they add to our life in more ways than just being tangible.
Yeah. They're literally like holders, in a lot of ways, they're literally holders of memories. Like even things like, like our controllers, for example, or like our tournament badges. Like these are things that like are imbued inherently with the memories of going to tournaments, or, meeting up with people at a Smash Fest or whatever. And like there's something very special about the fact that these objects can hold so much kind of like sacred relevance in our lives.
It makes them even more real because you can touch it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I don't know that I even necessarily have that reverence for objects broadly, but definitely when it comes to Melee, I do for some reason. Like all the stuff, like the GameCube that, like, you would have, your controller, those things are really important. The book, like being physical, I don't know. I kind of imagine like someone like, like maybe on a plane on the way to a tournament or something, like imagining them reading that. That's like the coolest thing I could imagine. And that'll probably never happen.
Yeah, I would like to second that, especially. For me, I think it was really about understanding that other hobbies had something like this. They had books, but I saw that in the competitive gaming space, a lot of the books that had existed were mostly a memoir format, or they were based in a very personalized experience. And obviously, my book is personalized to an extent, just in my own way, but I think I saw something that other hobbies had, that not only that Melee didn't have quite yet in terms of the scope of the book, before the last 3 years, obviously. Now we have multiple authors, but I saw that space dominated by memoirs and by things that weren't necessarily adjacent to history books that existed in sports or in other hobbies. And I didn't see that within gaming. So I wanted Melee to be there first, as very selfish as that sounds. The rationale for me was that, if I can help Melee get there first, I can set something that other people can improve on and do much better than me. That was my honest to God, like, inspiration for writing the book.
And you pioneered a field because of that. You writing that did actually end up opening up a space and demonstrating that there was interest in further books to be written on this topic that has been deserving of several books, of more books than I could possibly imagine for a very, very long time. So I think that's sick. I understand that a lot.
Yeah,
and obviously, I think what someone like Wife contributed in a memoir was very valuable for Melee, and I think there are so many contributions from people and produced things from people in the scene that that have some kind of, it's I don't know, I don't want to say the word idolatry, like the
It's
object.
intimate
Yeah,
in a
precisely,
really
AJ.
like relatable way that is so beautiful. I find that the content Melee produces, or that we produce, because ultimately it is us, it's not the game, it's our interaction with it. Like I'm continuously surprised after all these years about the things people can come up with to manipulate or create or invent from the base of the game itself, whether it's art, a code, a mod, anything. I'm still surprised after all these years, and that's like very cool.
Yeah,
It's,
I mean,
it's an
Melee
endless
is-
fountain.
Melee is literally, at least I've always viewed it as, it's a medium of self-expression, and I think a lot of fighting games are. This just happens to be one of the fighting games that is like most like a sandbox, I would say, more so than like Street Fighter or like other ones, and that there's just like there's so many little minute points of manipulation that you can use to express yourself and to create and to demonstrate who you are. And I think that's sick. It's demonstrating who you are and then using that to attack someone else, which is very funny, but also very cool.
It is somewhat of a fountain of dreams, so
Well,
I was gonna make that joke.
don't do it. You should. You should be glad you didn't.
Oh man, that's good. That's good.
Just one thing I noticed: the fountain of dreams.
That's good.
Yeah.
I want to talk about, you guys all just mentioned, that there's a broadening. It just came up. We have 4 Melee authors here right now when the number was 1, basically 1 in Wife just a few years ago. There weren't really that many Melee authors. And there's other people who have other content too, other books, other narratives that are coming out. So something that I think about with relation to this is I feel like for a long time now, our scene in the mainstream era has been defined by one canonical narrative, that being, of course, Sam Mox's documentary, The Smash Bros., which is not a book, but still, a narrative, still a piece of media that is putting something out there. So how do you guys feel now about the fact that there are maybe conflicting narratives or new, different... What does this expansion mean for Melee being interpreted through multi-partite lenses instead of just one? Yeah, no, you can raise your... Yeah, go. Yes.
Excellent. Perfect. I have thought about this for so long. I think one of the beautiful things about Melee content and the place where it is right now is that it has a certain level of distance from the standard subjects that are brought up when talking about narratives to Melee, but it retains a very different but still a kind of intimacy that is not just about the same introductory narrative. I feel like there's a complexifying there's just a more nuanced understanding of what Melee entails right now than just the people at the top, right? I think, for example, and I don't mean that derisively at all. I think the contributions of someone like Samex are so incredible, but I think as you see over time, as the community grows larger, there is still that level of grassroots. If you're in Melee, you produce things and you do things for the game and you do things for people around you. That level of intimacy is still there, and it's there in so many different ways, whether it's someone like me writing a book that serves as a semi-coherent narrative around a lot of information, or someone like Jim Jam writing a comedy book that satirizes a lot of elements of the Melee community as well. And of course with AJ and Nikki's book, which is just a very intensive, expansive study on so many different social dynamics and events, I guess to put it very clinically, at play within the scene. So I think it is an overwhelmingly good thing, and it is something we should encourage to complexify and broaden the scope of what kind of stories are worth telling in Melee. I think the distance thing is the key thing that I would bring up.
Yeah, and no one would really suggest that Sam Mox's documentary is like absolutely true or anything. So there's a lot of disputed elements or people who don't like how they were portrayed.
Of course.
So yeah, it's just
Or who
necessary
wasn't portrayed.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I didn't mean to say that it was totally true, but it's nonetheless, I think it's been like a canonical work, in terms of something
Of
with
course.
that scope
Absolutely.
for establishing the narrative
It's
of
an
our scene.
epic.
Although, of course, I mean, you did a send up of it way before any of us did, Jim Jam. So you've been playing with that for a while.
True.
That's right.
Yeah, the true innovator. This-
Yeah, copying someone else's format to satirize it. That's the real innovation.
No, but I think it's I agree. It's a good thing that we have all of these different views, and you guys just talked about who isn't represented in the stuff that we've had beforehand, and I think that with such a wide swath of authors that we have right now, of topics that you guys have covered, that's really evident, obviously. How do you guys want to see narratives continue to shift? Like, how do you want to see people represented? How do you want to see that broaden, since maybe there's a lot of work still to be done on what our narratives do hold up? Nikki?
I would love to talk about this because one of the things that really first attracted me and attracted me to and invigorated me about working on this book with AJ is that we're the first two queer people to write a book on a book about Melee, and I think, or maybe we're the first partnership between a cis woman and a non-binary person. I think, I don't totally remember, but either way, it's a big first, and it's for Melee, and I think it only opens the door to more firsts. I was actually I was talking with Spinda actually earlier today about how how do I say this? There are so many stories of really interesting players with really interesting anecdotes and narratives and engaging things that have happened in their lives as a result of Melee that, because we do have these canonized narratives, they often get kind of swept into an undercurrent. And part of what we were trying to tackle with the book is talking about some of those people, and that's only going to continue, I think, too. And it's not even, I'm not even talking about solely on an axis of gender or sexuality, but I'm also talking about, we talk a lot about the players. We talk a lot about the top players, and they're so sick, and they're their achievements and all that, and those things they're very special, and they're very important, and they're very valuable. But what's also very valuable is the work of the TOs that are behind the scenes and various community members. And think about every big major that you've been to where your favorite top player made a crazy run. There was probably a broadcaster there, and or a streamer there, and a TO there, and a whole team of people who saw it all. Back Pog. And those people have a lot of very fascinating stories to tell behind the scenes too, and I look forward to hearing more.
Nikki, I love the fact that you brought that up.
Very well said, yeah.
Thank you.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
It really warms my Melee Stats heart that you specifically brought that up, because I think the best part of each major is not top 8 and it's not even top 64. I think round 2 or wave 2 or whatever you want to call it, when you have local legends from super obscure regions playing really good players that everyone else recognizes and massive crowds gathering around them at CRTs, that I think is one of the most heartwarming sights. When you see Slow King versus I don't know, West Balls or something. Panda versus Axe, great example. I mean, I know Panda is not super obscure, but just when you see so much grind and so much effort put into something that should by all means have diminishing returns, it's just there for passion of the game, for proving yourself. I think that is just at the heart of the scene. What a beautiful way to put it, Nikki.
Thank you.
Well, and I think that all of your guys' books make that really clear in talking about and making it smaller rather than larger in some ways. By going smaller in what we examine, we can make the story larger. And I think that all of your guys' books do that. I mean, even Jim Jam. I mean, I think Jim Jam, your book plays with the ideas of lionizing top players, of having these top figures by literally putting putting Nadal and Federer on 60-foot pedestals within the opening 3 pages of the book, and then
I
comparing
love
them
the imagery. It was so well done.
and then
One of my
comparing
favorite
them
parts of the book.
to Mewtwo King and Mango later on. I mean, it's there's a way that we're playing with the fact that at this point we spent so long putting these players on pedestals. It's like, when does that topple over and we get to look at everything down below instead?
Yeah.
I loved your line, Jim Jam, of it's not enough to just go 0-2 at a tournament and call a top player by their first name. I thought that was I thought that was a very funny funny
Yeah.
part of it.
I mean, it's funny. It's just funny to talk about those them being sacred or whatever, like joking about that, because it's a little ridiculous. Like, but I mean, every sport, it's a necessity. You're going to have that element. Like the best players, they're pretty pervasive in Melee content for obvious reasons. But yeah, my experience with Melee is not, I love like the technical aspect of Melee, and I love watching like top level tournaments, but my experience is more rooted in like going to locals or playing with my friends and just going to the occasional major, and just, like walking around on day 2. That's probably, I mean, just staying in the venue till 6 a.m. playing friendlies. Like that is what I really, cherish about it. Like I love going to watch top 8, but that's definitely not the full story of Melee. And lots of other stories could be told. There could be fictional stories. It doesn't all have to be documenting.
Fictional stories in Melee is that is something I want to see. I remember.
I would love
Jim Jam. I remember when we did Major the Zine, you submitted a short fictional story about Melee that we published, and that was great.
Yeah.
I
I think
the
that
comics
will.
people make too.
That'll happen. That's just the next step of it. No one would really bat an eye if like you had a story where like basketball is kind of like if like basketball were the backdrop for the story, but a movie, it's not about basketball, but like basketball's the backdrop. You wouldn't think twice about that.
No Basket?
What's that?
You ever seen Kuroko no Basket? That's what it's about. Where's Kuroko no Melee? That's my question.
I think that's the next evolution.
Yo, have you guys seen Ping Pong?
Oh my god.
Wait, but here's
One of
funny...
those guys is a lot like Mango, I notice.
I can't. Not like me. I think I'm like this guy.
I'm kind of like all of them combined.
Well,
Did you see
all their good
he's
parts.
like Mango, and you're like him.
Did you see the Landis tweet that was, I don't remember who he was tweeting at, but he was like, your fox is like a combination of Pico and Crush or something, or Pecco and Crush. I died. I love that one.
That's deranged. I love it. I think we're just getting smaller. We're getting smaller in the stories we tell, and I am really excited about that in general. Just looking through my notes and stuff to change a little bit. All of the books contend with something that I think is really, evident right now, which is that we're a community that has been sort of metaphorically orphaned, abandoned by Nintendo, and I think that we've spilled so much ink already over what that means about the community. I'd be really interested to know what it meant in the writing of these books, because you guys all say in all of your books, this is one of the core principles of AJ and Nicole's book, that in not being overseen by Nintendo, there's a freedom that is owed to the community to create its own identity. And so I'd love to know what sort of lateral freedom you felt like you maybe had in writing your book, because we are sort of unpoliced in certain ways. I'd be interested to know if that impacted your guys' writing at all.
I don't know. I'm trying to understand this idea of lateral freedom.
I think what I mean by saying that is just we can move in so many different ways because Nintendo's not watching over us until they, put the chains on us. And so I'm wondering if that freedom you think impacted your instinct to write this book, any of your guys' instincts to write any of your books, and what you felt like you could do with the Melee community as topic of writing.
Well, for me, it was just about telling the truth, right? So even if Nintendo was involved behind the scenes in a way that we could publicly or in a way that we could publicly verify or point to some kind of support for the scene, I would still want to tell the truth, as simple as that sounds. And looking at Melee, seeing how Nintendo specifically has gone from being just distant to being actively hostile at very important moments in the community's history, I felt it was important to highlight that, as well as just be honest about the dynamics of the scene that came to be as a result, I guess. So for me, it was never about feeling lateral freedom or feeling like I could do something that I wouldn't be able to do if Nintendo was more active in the community. For me, it was just about wanting to tell the truth.
For the things that I want to make, I don't even really. I kind of think of Melee as just separate from Nintendo. I don't even connect them like, I don't think, like, this is a Nintendo game really at this point. I don't know why. But the sort of things I want to make, they're not, if Melee is like a children's party game and that's what Nintendo wants it to be, like, the content that I'm making is not like children's content. So it would be pretty frustrating if Melee were like, or Nintendo were like, we don't like you using the footage in this game in the Smash Bros. Because there are curse words or something like that. Like, I'm happy to just like Melee be its own thing and that culture arise, and Nintendo can just do whatever they want, just ignore us ideally. Yeah.
AJ, I loved one point you brought up in your book specifically about the soft sort of the soft aesthetic that a lot of Melee has, in contrast with the pretty hardcore community around it, and kind of the different ways that Melee players like to present themselves. I thought that was a very astute point that you brought up in the book, again, specifically with the soft imagery of the game and many of its characters. I think that's something I think about a lot, that you put so well early on.
Yeah.
It's funny when you think about it, these smooth polygon that are all
They're very
designed
cute,
for kids.
right?
Yeah, everything is really kind of cute. There's no it's no Mortal Kombat gore level, You could play it as a kid and your mom wouldn't think twice about it. And now it's like one of the most serious games I've ever encountered in my life.
That is just a funny contradiction.
And we're just
like, that's
clapping
funny.
to Dreamland, like.
Yeah.
Wow, I love the Kirby stage in this game. In this game that I play professionally.
That I just did $100 money match for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, also.
Yeah, I love watching. I love watching the most famous player of one of the cutest characters in the game just pop off alone in his room and yell and just go and just exhibit so much just hyper masculinity and turbo aggroness while playing Jigglypuff. I love the contrast. And when reading the early part of your book, AJ, that was one of the things I thought of actually instantly.
We don't think a lot about the iconography in Smash because we're so player focused often, and it goes back to our discussion about expanding the narrative and bringing all forms of perspectives and discussions onto the table.
Yeah, you go, Nikki. You go.
Okay, also, one thing that I wanted to note that we do talk about is the fact that there is somewhat of like there's a weird irony in that, like, Melee is a children's party game, but then the children playing Melee loved it so much that they grew up and then just continued to play it. And this was inherently a subversion of what Nintendo wanted for the game, but like that's in part Melee's success can be attributed to the fact that it was so popular with kids at the time, and that kids grew up with it, they developed nostalgia around it, and they wanted to continue living through that.
Yeah, I had a class the other day where a director came in and was talking about the movies that she makes, and she was talking about decisions to set her movies away from what she knew, and she said, it's because I see things more clearly. When you go to a new town and notice their traditions, they stand out to you more than if you are in your own town. But I think something pretty incredible about all of your guys' books is that you have managed to take that outside perspective that Anouk was talking about earlier in order to point out how unique and interesting the ways we have constructed these communities are, that we maybe even don't think about on the regular because we're so used to it. Following up on that, I think all of you position Melee as unique, not just as unique as a video game, not just as unique as a competition, but truly unique in that there is nothing else like it if you look in any of those categories at all. And I'd be interested to know the ways that you guys found out more about this community, all of you guys, in researching your books, and what you think truly sets it apart differently.
I think one of the things I started to notice the most was our reliance on residual media and outdated or dead hardware. In a lot of the texts I was reading, there was a big focus on no, I lost it. I think I lost it.
You were talking about dead hardware and focus on outdated media. I remember in the book you said that you actually believe that the reason Melee has stuck around so long is because of this reliance on outdated media, and that keeps us tied to it in some ways.
That goes back to what I was saying earlier about how I feel like there's such a strong relationship, not only like to me personally with objects, but obviously it's proven true by our relationship with the objects that we use in Melee, and how each of them can be a different means to define ourselves. Like what kind of setup we use, what does our controller look like, what stickers on it, like what did I put on my badge when I walk in the venue. And I think that's definitely something that's helping us keep alive, keep trucking on.
It's also like I went to a New England local once, and they were all running. It was Balance Patch, and they were all running monitors, and I was like, "What is this? Come on!" Like that's like I look at a sea of monitors, and I'm like, "That's for League of Legends players." Do I look like I'm Platinum 2? No, I'm trying to play some Melee. Like there is something. Like, there's like this emotion, this like primal emotional lizard brain response for me of like no, it's the CRT and the GameCube or the Wii and the GameCube controllers, and like I understand that like I understand in like my rational mind that like no, it's good that Melee ultimately becomes more accessible. Yeah, we should look into adapters, boxes, whatever. But like I think for a lot of people who have been in the scene for a long time, there is this feeling of like no, like that experience of walking into a local and you hear the buzz of the CRTs, like the collective buzzing of the hive is like that's part of it for me. Like without that, I'm missing a crucial part of the experience. And I think the fact that like we can all relate to those stories, and that's actually something that I liked about Jim Jam's book, is that it mentions the experience of going to sleep at 5:30 a.m. and then getting mad because you can't fall asleep at 9:30 p.m. for your 10 a.m. pool. I was like, that is an experience that we all share, and it's like through sharing that experience, like there is something gained as a community for sure that like we can all relate to that.
Yeah, some of the stuff that I'm ostensibly making fun of in my book are things that I think and feel like irrationally, I would say, at tournaments or something. Like I definitely love, like, I think it's so cool, walk into the giant venue or your local and it's just rows of CRTs. That's really interesting and it's super cool. But for me, like the competitive element, going to tournaments and like kind of witnessing like this self-serious, like super intense attitude, and then maybe objectively being like, well, this isn't that serious, it's just a game. But then I feel that myself, like, playing in the tournament, legitimately having that like serious, like of, something changes in you, and then it's like, oh, I want to win, like this is important. So like one, it's like this cartoonish game, and it's kind of silly for me to be at my local and get mad that I got like like 9th instead of 7th or something. But I also love that, and it is funny. It's funny to make fun of that, and people like their little rationalizations or justifications for what they think or how they act. But Melee just seems like a unique community in that way. Just the game itself and people's mindsets. Like I like all of it. I like being, experiencing those things.
Part of it.
I think I'd be remiss not to mention then, because your guys' books all chronicle a pretty specific part of time in the community of the past few years. Anoke, obviously you chronicle a lot of time before that too, but we're sort of in a new era now that we have to contend with, and AJ and Nikki, you guys in your book propose this idea of the holy trinity of sort of artifacts that build Melee, of the controller, the console, and the CRT, right?
Right.
And if we look at how I play Melee these days,
Yeah.
I don't use a console, I don't use a CRT, and I certainly have many other options on how to use a controller too.
Yeah, but
So-
you'd use the GameCube controller.
I
But
do.
how
but I
you
get very
connect
angry
it
at
would be, yeah, true.
But I don't have
connect
to
it
use
would
the
be
GameCube
different.
controller. I could use
It's
a
true.
box controller. you
That is
know?
true.
I could,
You're right.
I could
Forgot about the
get a
box for a
cereal.
sec.
I could get a cereal box and put a bunch of different little wires in it, and I'd be fine.
Or an egg carton.
Yeah.
Shout out to Greg Turbo.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Shout out.
So I guess what I'm saying with that is just what sort of writing narratives would you like to see covering the new era that we're in right now? Because I know maybe the pandemic will end, things will change, but I think it's clear that with Slippy, with these technological advancements, we're in a different time either way when we come out of the other side of this.
It's hard to say how we're going to be affected by this when we're still in it, and it's been going on for so long and time has stopped to exist. But I know that I would encourage this to be a time in the Melee player's journey of self-reflection, because we're kind of in this forced idea of solitude. So maybe love to see some like emotional growth or like group discussion of growth in any way in terms of our identities as gamers going forward. Please.
If you don't mind, I want to jump off that because arguably, I want to touch on something that I've heard people outside of the community talk about and criticize publicly, but I think it's because that they don't understand that this is actually an extremely positive change. This summer, there was this whole online reckoning of lots of people from the community being accused of assault or harassment, and there was this whole fallout that happened in Ultimate, but also in Melee too. And I've read online some people who are not in the community saying some negative things about it, saying, well, what does that say for the Melee community? What does that say about them that this was allowed to happen? But the way that I see it is that quarantine allowed for this amazing period of people feeling safe enough and comfortable enough to voice that publicly and to ignite this really serious change. And like I've been talking about with some of my friends, and we're like, dude, when we come back to tournaments, it's going to be a safer environment. It's going to be a better environment to be in because of that. And like, I don't know. I think that's awesome. I think
for
that's
sure.
fantastic. So I think that all I'm saying is that I think that growth is starting to happen, and it's listen, COVID's terrible, but this is one silver lining that I think is really crucial.
I guess like Anok, if you were to write a follow-up to the book with what's happened since, how would you change your approach at all in writing down the history of what's happened, considering what's happened now?
It's funny you mentioned that, because it goes back to what you asked before about a process that went into going through media and looking through hardware and the research process for a book. I think when I wrote the book of Melee, I was at a point in my life where it came from, and I think Zane, maybe because you know me personally, maybe you already knew this going into reading it, but I was someone who was very involved in my local scene at UConn. Like I was our TO, I played in TMG, and part of the perspective of my book is that it was written by someone who couldn't do that stuff anymore because he was getting older and and balancing his career. So a lot of my book has a lot of my book, and I think you can tell this through the tone it's written, has restrained passion in it, right? So it's rediscovering all the things that got me into Melee and all the things that I loved about it through the lens of someone else and through the lens of so much information on how other people got into the scene. So when I wrote the book, I was at a point in my life where I wasn't active locally. I had friends that were into Melee, and we were into following the scene and everything, but we only went to majors, but we had all experienced what it was like to be locally involved. So when I wrote the book of Melee, it was very informational because for me it was like rediscovering what got me into the game and what got me so involved. And I'm at a point in my life right now where I think if I were to write the second book, I would want to focus. So 2 things. I would want to focus more on the actual structure of the community as someone who's a little more a little more involved, like behind the scenes work now than I was when I started working on the book in 2016. So I don't think it would be the story of. It wouldn't be the story of the Melee community told by someone who was part of it and then eventually had to move on in his life. It would be the story of someone who went through that and then suddenly found himself back in the thick of Melee, attending majors, like making short videos, like mini documentaries and stuff. So it's someone who so it would come from someone with a perspective of finding himself like still in the same community that he thought by all means he was going to leave, right? So I would have a very different approach, and I think if I wrote the Book of Melee 2, in addition to covering the obvious competitive results and recaps, I would want to, if I were to rewrite it again, my biggest regret with the first book is that I didn't think I was in a place to understand the social dynamics of the scene, both the good and the bad, to tastefully like illustrate it, and I didn't think I was the person to necessarily tell that story, and I think if I wrote it again in like 2 years or another 3 years, that's something I would feel a lot more confident speaking about and being very honest about, especially as I've spent more time in the scene. I'm much more familiar with the things that are not romanticized, that actually kind of suck about it, that I'd want to be a lot more. It wasn't that I wasn't honest about it. It's more that like I'm at a different place in my life where I have a better understanding of it directly, if that makes any sense. Like I think I'm at a point right now with my relationship with the scene, and at least just my broader life experiences of understanding, for example, how much volunteer work goes into maintaining it. Mm-hmm. Like that's something that it's hard not to be bitter about sometimes when it comes to doing work for Melee, and it's something that I took for granted as just kind of something everyone went through. But now that I'm older, I'm married, I have a lot of responsibilities. Managing Melee I think all of us on this panel can certainly agree, we're all older too. We have our responsibilities. We have our commitments. We have ambitions outside the game that we have to balance with our passion for the game. That's something I would want to explore a lot more. And I think especially in this current era with Slippy and with Fizzy, with people putting so much work into preserving the game during a pandemic, that is an element of the Melee community, just both the expectation that someone will fill a hole for us and the expectation that we all have to pitch in. That's something I would want to take a much closer look at. I think by the way, AG's book does a phenomenal job on this, and I think Nikki, your afterword in the book especially was quite poignant on this point as well.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I really
and Jim Jam, even your book, like you satirize the like the casual like melee player like melee player tropes, but I think the way you do it actually offers quite a bit of honest insight, even if it is satirical. Like that's what good satire does. I think you do a good job on that same point as well. So I would take inspiration from you three on this panel, but I would also reflect on how my relationship with Melee has changed. Sorry, that was kind of a long answer, but I hope it was
coherent.
It
made sense.
It's all good. We're unfortunately coming to the end, which is really sad to me. So I was having fun. Be very stereotypical and end with the endings. Anouk just mentioned the afterword to AJ and Nikki's book, which Nikki wrote, and
so pog.
Nikki said something really incredible there, and I'm going to quote actually from the afterword here, if that's okay.
Please. I just want everybody on the stream to realize I'm planning on reading the afterword.
Oh, okay.
Later on.
Well,
please,
it's fine.
They'll
get to see both. But Nikki wrote this thing. It says, while the seemingly limitless potential for self-expression that SSBM boasts never fails to reel me back in if I've spent some time away from it, I'll be the first to admit, competitions in a game this complex is a demanding, punishing endeavor that I personally only ever found occasionally rewarding. And then you talk about Super Smash Brothers as a mirror, as something that shows you what you're going through in life. And I am really curious to know from you guys, as we end, what you see Smash going forward being, because you all have very different endings in how you end. Jim Jam ends his book with literally the light of Mango's gameplay subsuming us into one hive mind and returning us home. But then you also said at the very beginning of this that you hope Melee never dies and it goes on forever. Anoke literally ends his book by saying, "Melee will not last forever." That is legitimately the second to last sentence of his book. So I am really curious to know from you guys, what's next? What's next as we reckon with these smaller injustices, these things we need to fix in our community, this self-reflection? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, give it 20 years. I'm kidding. I don't have an intelligent answer for this.
It's hard to see this stopping. Like, I don't see Melee stopping anytime soon. Like, look at us in the 5 days of Melee. Like, the amount of work, love, people, hours, and passion that has gone into just this event alone is proof that we're not budging. But, you know, I won't last forever, so it's hard to even fathom, like, what lasts beyond me.
Yeah, I think the reason I think that so strongly of that is that I think things, you know, the limitations we have, you know, not to get too Mark Fisher here, but like I think the fact that we're all in this world for only a limited amount of time, it adds a lot of meaning and puts a lot of things in perspective for us, right? So for me, when I say that Melee won't last forever, I think that's part of why it matters so much to me. I want the game I want that final timeline to continue being pushed off at, like, for when Melee quote unquote has, like, dies or as people stop playing it or whatever. I want that to be continuously pushed far into the future until the, you know, way beyond the day I die, you know, like that's what I mean. Like, cause then it will be over for me, but you know, other people will carry the torch.
Wow, I haven't
you know,
thought that far.
I know that's kind of a blunt way to put it, but that's honestly how I see it. I don't know.
Kind of going back to your last question, like coming out of the pandemic, hopefully, I mean, things like 5 days of Melee, hopefully everyone is kind of in this mode of remembering what it can be like, you know, at its best. And everyone is highly motivated eventually coming out of the pandemic to make it even bigger, make it safer, make it better. I mean,
the first major is going to be so cool. It's going to have so many people. It'll be great.
I feel that way. I hope everyone really is kind of like brimming with excitement because, you know, for me, if Melee were to exist as mostly an online thing, that's not super interesting to me. I think I'd probably keep playing casually, but I don't really think I'd be... It just wouldn't be as interesting to me. Like, I want to go to Genesis. I want to go to tournaments.
Yeah. I miss it so much right now.
I can't even imagine the top players. Like, I'm obviously you see on their stream, but man.
Yeah. I just want to see my friends in person to, you know, the sound of clicking and clacking in a ballroom. That's the, you know,
that's the experience, right? Like, that's what we treasure.
It's so physical. It's so interesting.
Yeah. I will say, actually, the one thing that I do think is kind of cool here is that because somebody brought this up earlier about the 5 days of Melee thing, and that we're using 5 days of Melee as this way to remember what the community can be at its best. I think it is somewhat poignantly beautiful that after this time of a lot of strife, a lot of difficult growth, a lot of harsh truths, we're coming into this fall-winter period of remembering all the things that make this game and this community just truly exceptional and unique. And I really look forward to seeing how that shapes how the community functions over the next maybe 2 years.
It gives me hope because this sprung up so quickly and so many people contributed to it. I was kind of amazed. Like, you know, it seems like this went from just concept to happening really fast, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, of course I would contribute. Sure. I'd love to do that."
Of course.
Literally,
because we love the game.
Everyone I know who's in any position to contribute has told me either privately or said so somewhat publicly, being like, "Yeah, I just took on a bunch of responsibilities really fast because I was just really excited to help, and now I'm really overwhelmed." And I'm like, "Yeah, I feel you."
And now I'm quitting Melee.
I'm quitting Melee so that I can work on 5 days of Melee.
Yeah.
I think what draws us into is there's a theme that I found really beautiful because it's in all of your books that Melee teaches us about ourselves. Anoke, you say something about how the shy kid can learn how to put themselves out there. AJ and Nikki, you say it teaches you how to learn, even that learning Melee taught you how to learn. And Jim Jam, I mean, you have this great concept of the Melee brain and the tennis brain of the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere coming together, but that really they were in you. Two wolves were inside you all along. There were always the two wolves in
Expanding
there.
brain.
And so I think for a lot of us, being involved with Melee is how we learn more about ourselves. So how could you not want to continue doing it in whatever form,
Yeah.
Beauty.
I think that's
No, that's
part
so
of it.
true.
In closing, I would just say I really highly recommend all three of these books. We didn't get to talk about the nuances of all of them, but they do such different things in such incredible ways. I would say, I mean, Jim Jam's book is genuinely the hardest I've laughed reading something since pandemic started, 100%.
Thank you.
Very funny.
And,
Confirmed.
And like I said, it really does skewer some of the things that we've been talking about, like idol worship, like the lengths we push ourselves to this game really, really brilliantly. Anok's book is such a wonderful history. It's there if you need a pocket history. There is like nothing better than this, and it still manages to instill that there is so much love, and that's the reason behind this. Anok opens his book by saying this is a story about Melee's, this is gaming's greatest underdog story, and he's very clear when he starts by saying this is a story about the people who made this happen, not about the top players. It's about the community, the smaller people who we've been talking about the whole time. And then AJ and Nikki's book, I just think really, you guys, this book is an important time for now. We weren't able to talk about this stuff too particularly, but I think that if you guys are interested in speaking truth to power in any way, but also in the Melee community, Melee is Broken does that in a really, really incredibly insightful way. There are things in there that I think all of us think about all of the time, about this hero worship, about the lengths we push ourselves to, about maybe the parasocial organizations we find ourselves in that aren't that healthy, that they put in there and just say so candidly. It's what we've all been thinking about, but they actually say it, both of them. So it's pretty incredible. I would highly recommend all three of these books, and I was very much enjoying reading them and revisiting them over the past few days to prepare for this panel. In closing, is there anything you guys want to say as we finish up?
I would like to say thank you, Zane, for hosting this
Oh,
panel.
Zane, thank you, Zane.
Oh, thank you, Zane. Thank you.
And
I also wanted to say
if
that.
any of you are, if any of
Points
you are
changing
watching
now.
this,
Anok said it first.
if any of you are watching this, follow Zane on Twitter. And follow his YouTube. He's got great interviews. He has a lot of good content himself.
Knows what he's
Oh,
doing.
yeah.
Follow
You
him
want
as
to
well.
get points.
All
Come
right,
on.
You're going
come
over
on.
a little bit now. All right, so final score for the panel. AJ and Nikki showed their book first, so that's 1 point for each of them. Jim Jam said happy to be here first, so that's a point for him. And then Anok praised me first, so
Oh, it's
that's
a
point for him.
tie.
It's a four-way tie. Great, we all won. It's a competition.
Yay.
You hate to
Wonderful.
see it.
Winners.
All right, guys. Anything else you guys want to say? That's it.
Free Melee.
Free
Yeah,
Melee.
free Melee.
The book is Poggers.
The book is
Free.
Poggers. Melee is Broken
book's
is
Poggers.
Poggers.
Yes, please read our Poggers book.
Spoopy.ca/book.
Reading is poggers.
Reading
In general.
Yeah.
Read whatever you want.
Take
Yeah.
care,
Fine.
everybody. Happy
Not
holidays.
tryharding is resident sleeper. God, I hate that I say that. Never mind.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I'm gonna pretend
the
I didn't hear
stream.
that.
When the
Stop
panel's
it.
gone into Twitch emotes, we know it's gone too far. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you
care.
guys have
Thank
been
you.
enjoying the 5 days
Take
of
care.
Melee.
Thanks
Talk
for
to
listening.
these people on their social media. Talk to all of us. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Later.
Bye.
Peace.